Mr. Oluseyi Olufemi of Dataphyte is the country director of Dataphyte. He's bringing data intelligence and accountability experts. Please, a round of applause. And to moderate this panel is Professor Emeritus Akpan Epo, a towering figure in Nigerian economists. Please, a round of applause for our panel.
Yes, has done very well to bring us here. And the outlook from adjustment pains to consolidation gains, ensuring reforms, deliver welfare, and 5 minutes on your perspective on this report. But I would like the World Bank. The World Bank said it will take us 50 years to get the outcomes from this report. And I look to that, but I think in the long run we're all dead. Others can give their own perspective. So let me start with Dr Christian Ebeke, country rep, the IMF. Their perspective on our NES report.
Thank you. I thought you wanted to start with the World Bank.
I don't forget that. So that's why I mentioned that. So when he's talking,
All right.
you tell us when we get positive outcomes.
All right. No, thank you very much, and thank you, NES, for inviting the IMF, and also distinguished panelists. Thank you for attending. I think we heard very solid presentation by Dr. Hassan Mahmoud, also by the NES on the outlook. I just wanted to emphasize first that whatever we heard is subject to tremendous uncertainty, right? So the forecast that we saw is based on a scenario which looks very much like the one that the IMF had prior to the conflict in the Middle East, where we were seeing growth at around 4.4%. We were seeing inflation trending downwards, FX reserve going up, fiscal deficit remaining contained, right? But the situation that we face with now, with the very uncertain conflict, we don't know the intensity, how long it's going to be prolonged, how long it's going to be, there with us. This is bringing tremendous uncertainty for Nigeria, but also for many emerging markets in general. If you look at countries like Turkey, they lost more than $20 billion just trying to defend the currency. Many other emerging markets are also under severe pressures right now, and the risk of inflation being de-anchored is actually one of the most acute risks faced by central bank today. So we faced the situation where uncertainty is really, really strong. And at the same time, we are pleased with the fact that Nigeria has indeed built the policy frameworks and buffers that should help policy implementation, but also resilience to this shock. So when you look at monetary policy, there is no doubt that the MPC is very, very focused on bringing inflation down, and you can see all the measures that the MPC and the central banks have taken so far. Same thing on fiscal policy, the big mistakes of the past of seeing, having the central bank financing the deficit, having, ways and means everywhere. Those big mistakes are now behind us. So even on fiscal policy, despite some challenges in budget implementation and capex releases, domestic revenue mobilization, which is still very low, at least on the fiscal, we're also seeing some positive trends, and the pace of reform is continuing. Having said all of this, I think, when the IMF was emphasizing the importance of continuing or staying the course, and together with the World Bank, it was sometimes met with a lot of skepticism in Nigeria. But now we see clearly why these reforms were so important, to build resilience and to expand the buffers so that you can use them when the time comes. And today the time has come for Nigeria to pivot from stabilization, as the report says, to now looking very, very carefully at the trickle-down, how this growth that is being generated, how those fiscal buffers that are being created, how the policy frameworks that have been strengthened can actually help bring relief to the most vulnerable people. I think this is a topic very, very important for the bank, but also for the fund. It's important for Nigeria to strengthen the ability of the politics to actually reach out to the most vulnerable. Poverty is still high and rising. Food insecurity remains very high. And the conflict in the Middle East is actually going to lead to two differentiated effects on Nigeria. One will be most likely an inflation shock if the conflict persists. High crude oil prices, high refined fuel prices, all of this should actually increase inflation. Right now, as we speak, palm prices in Nigeria have increased by much more than any other countries in Africa. Okay, so about 60 to 65% of fuel prices at the pump. That's the increase in fuel prices at the pump. 65% so far, which is the highest growth rate that we can see in terms of fuel price acceleration on the continent. This is likely to lead to higher inflation. At the same time, fertilizer prices have also gone up, which is again a very unfortunate development ahead of the planting season, which will also have an impact on the agricultural sector and likely worsen food insecurity. So it's very important, and I will end there, for policies to think about how the potential that can be secure from higher commodity prices, higher oil prices, how this windfall can actually be used very, very effectively, well targeted, so that relief can be put forward for poor people, for the most vulnerable, in a way that still preserve fiscal sustainability and macroeconomic stability. This is a job not just of the federal government. This is a job that should be co-shared with subnationals as well, because when there is a windfall, not only the federal government wins, also the money is shared through FAC at the lower level of government. So it's very important to have this social compact to make sure that if it persists and if the situation for the most vulnerable worsens, that there is a very swift and solid response so that they can actually cope with this shock and the reform momentum can continue. If nothing is done to protect the most vulnerable, it becomes very, very difficult to sustain additional reform, but also on the communication front. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invitation from NES. So kind of going back to your point, Prof. So I think the main point we wanted to try to make, I think back 2 years ago, it wasn't that the pain will last 10, 15 years. I think what's really important is that the reforms stick to 10, 15 years. And there is, I think, two different points. So if you take one reform in 1 year and then in the second year reverse it, you're basically doing the bad, the worst of all scenarios. So if you look at all the experiences in the world, like India, Georgia, a lot of countries, reforms, especially when it comes to macro reforms, these have to, be put in place and don't play too much around them. I'm quoting, I think, the DGCBN back then. He's, sometimes the central bank should be boring in the sense of not trying to kind of be going a little bit kind of in different directions. That's mainly the main point. It's not for the pain to last 10, 15 years, but the reforms or the correct, I wouldn't say the correct, but kind of the orthodoxy to kind of stay for 10 to 15 years, because that will kind of help anchor expectations and put the economy on the right path. And kind of just briefly kind of on, I guess, on your main point on how we see the outlook, which also complementing what Christian, I think this is the time where Nigeria kind of, it's the big test of the reforms, right? So that's when you have these shocks, that's the time when kind of to see whether these reforms stick or not. And I think, we've seen a lot of comments kind of in the public and how that will impact Nigeria. And from one side, as Christian said, you have, I would say, an overall macro windfall coming from higher oil prices, which will theoretically should lead to higher fiscal revenues and higher, export earnings, which is good on the macro side, kind of the big picture, but at the micro side you'll have higher inflation. So then the question is how to avoid certain pitfalls that Nigeria had in the past, including in the past when oil prices went up, Nigeria went on a pro-cyclical fiscal policy, which didn't help. So I think ideally you want to have, I would say, a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, where either you save a little bit of these windfalls or you use kind of these windfalls in a very targeted way to those who really are impacted on the micro levels, and rather than have kind of blanket, price controls and subsidies. These have been tested in the past and haven't worked. So I think from a policy perspective, it's very important to what has been done in the past to kind of maintain it now, and I think that's kind of the true test, and use any windfalls that will be generated from higher oil revenues in a very targeted way to those who are really impacted, and rather than having kind of blanket subsidies, which in the past haven't worked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Chair, permit me to rest on protocols already established. I haven't read the reports, really, but of course I intend to read it. But listening to the presentation here, the ending part, I heard him talk about the risks, but I didn't hear much about the opportunities. If it's not in that report, I think it's important to capture that. Even when you have things you would consider as shocks to the economy, there are also opportunities, embedded therein. Another thing too I didn't see in that report is capital market outlook, because it's also important. It's a major sector of the Nigerian economy, so it's something that you shouldn't miss out, next time. And it goes without saying that when you talk about vulnerability to shocks, really, if you notice, before 2020, our market used to be very vulnerable to shocks. But after 2020, the story changed. In 2020, remember, even despite COVID, the market, when I say the market, I mean our stock market, was among the best in the world in terms of returns. And even today, as we speak, we can see what has happened there recently. If you want to measure the performance of the market, you use the market cap and the all-share index. The market cap today has gone in excess of 128 trillion naira. You might say in dollar terms that's not much, but if you check the leap, it's actually a quantum leap. The all-share index too has gone above the psychological threshold of 200,000. Now all this is also happening amidst the geopolitical tension. So what that tells us is that our capital market is very resilient. And why is that so? It is partly so because of the composition of the market. Before 2020, I talked about foreign investors dominated, accounted for over 50% of transactions in the market. So when at the slightest, sign of trouble, of course, they left. Remember to, again, part of why we have a challenge in Nigeria in terms of capital importation is that the bulk of it is foreign portfolio investment. The last NBS report, quarter 4 of 2025, was very clear. $6.4 billion came in, out of which over 85% of that was foreign portfolio investments. It's what you might call, hot money. But today, in the market, when I say market, I mean the stock market, the story has changed. The composition is now more of domestic investors. So you have domestic investors accounting over 80%. So even when foreign investors leave, the impact is not that much. It's not felt as as we used to feel it in prior to 2020. So the point I'm making is that the market is now resilient. That's also part of why you find the banking sector recapitalization, a huge success. We hear that 2 banks have met the recapitalization requirement. Where did they raise the money? Largely from the market. Over 4 trillion naira, was raised from our domestic market. So when people say the market is not deep, not deep enough, there is evidence to show that a lot of improvements, has been made. So essentially, I want to believe that 2026, the outcome will be strong. It's I want to support the idea of the consolidation gain. And that's also going to be on the back of a number of listings we're expecting, a number of IPOs we're expecting, one of which is the Dangote refinery. By the time Dangote refinery leads by July, June, you can see the market will also be up. So it will finally, I want to mention that it's important to maintain this macroeconomic stability. Sometimes when you have high inflation, what do investors do? They pivot to assets that are considered safer. One of them is, of course, equities. Equities, reports have shown, studies have shown, that over a long period of time, usually perform above inflation. Today, year-to-day return is 29%. Inflation is running at 15.606%. Yeah, so yeah. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. All protocols are duly observed. So I've actually read the reports and I've made some quick notes on key reforms mentioned and the indicators. I'll quickly give like the positive and the positive aspects in terms of the positive progress, and then outstanding issues that still needs to be addressed. And I'll take that one by one. One is that the unification of the exchange rates has really reduced uncertainty in the system, made economic activities more predictable, and improved confidence in business activities. But recall that this unification actually stabilized the exchange rate at a depreciated level, which has inflationary pressures. And it's a source of inflationary pressures given a high import dependence. Two is the fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy removal has really improved fiscal conditions and, importantly, increased allocations to the subnational governments. However, fiscal discipline remains an issue. The gains are yet to be translated into improvements in household and welfare. And we also see inflationary pressures as a result of the fuel subsidy, which is obvious. In terms of bank recapitalization, that's entirely positive. We'll see that reform will strengthen the banking sector and hopefully provide a credit to productive sectors. In terms of inflation targeting, we'll see inflation being eased to 15.06% in February, driven by different factors. One is the decline in food inflation, and also the tight monetary stance of the central bank, but also importantly the rebasing of the CPI measure, which is also a driver of the reduction. So practically inflation has slowed down. It's just like applying brakes to a moving car, but the households still face the burden of the cost of living crisis in the economy, and this is anticipated because of import dependence and limited social protection and other safety nets. In terms of oil sector, the liberalization of oil sector and privatization has increased refining capacity. However, the ongoing war involving the US, Israel, and Iran has pushed the global oil prices up sharply. And in Nigeria, we also experienced petrol prices have risen. And so we are supposed to gain from the production side. However, our production, we need to maximize our production capacity to be able to maximize the revenue from that increase. In terms of economic indicators, we noticed that GDP is growing at 4.0%. However, this is driven by services sector with limited spillover effects on the economy. The composition is still an issue, and if we are to meet the $1 trillion economy by 2030, we are to be growing at 10 to 12% per annum. The biggest worry is debt. The biggest worry is debt because while it has increased to 153 trillion, it is still within the threshold of 34% debt to GDP ratio. However, The problem is the rising cost of debt servicing, and that puts Nigeria in a very fiscal, vulnerable position. So two key issues are worrisome. One is that inflationary pressures are renewed, and two, the fiscal vulnerability is still an issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Olufemi. Yes. Your perspective.
All right, thank you. I'm a bit pessimistic about seriousness about welfare and credibility. And while I was seated there and I listened to the conversations and I saw the review of the report and all the concerns, all the conversations that I see, it appears that our concerns as economists is just about macroeconomics and microeconomics. And the microeconomics, we talk only about the firm. I saw the submission of Doctor when he was talking about a doctor from the name skips me now. His resolution of everything was the public sector, in the macroeconomic, monetary issues, and the private sector, the firm. I didn't hear anything about the household. Of all the data, even the one that was reviewed and everything that has been said, nothing is said about the household. No data about unemployment. I didn't see one person that spoke about unemployment. Because what? Since 2024, by April, by tomorrow, by April, it will be two years, 8 quarters that we have not had records of unemployment. And when we're talking about welfare, we're talking about pain. It's not just the pain of the yes, we know business organizations are entities, but we are talking about the pain of human beings. When we keep talking like this, it appears as if the human beings, the supply side, those who make these things happen, it appears as if they don't matter in our conversation. So when we're talking about welfare, talking about credibility is not just financial credibility by Fitch, it's about credibility by the people. That do the people believe in us? It's not just for the international organizations to believe that, oh, we are doing well in our monetary policy, we are doing well in our fiscal policy, we are blocking leaks. What about the people? Well, a country does not, okay, of all the reforms that we've had monetary reforms, we've had those on the fiscal FAC and taxes and all of that. No mention of any reform that has to do with the people. What's the reform on health? What's the reform on housing? What's the reform on food prices? What are we doing about that? We're talking about, in this report, he was talking about the fact that we have one of the costliest price of electricity in the region, and we have the least hours, the least access. Now, how will people be able to make a living when they don't have electricity? In my area, those of us who managed to be able to have solar, we are under threat. They said we are the problems of the people. And we are being threatened that we are the one responsible for lack of supply. Whereas it is not really about us. So I think the conversation and subsequent conversation, here, on this topic and the NES, I think we have to take development economics seriously, more seriously. We have to start talking about unemployment, poverty, inequality. We have to start talking about the health of our people. These are the kind of issues that should be coming up in our outlook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I definitely agree with you.
Let me say that
Just as a moderator, perhaps we have no unemployment problem because the data says it's 5.1%. So we are full employment. This is part of the problem. So I'm supporting you so much in a way, perhaps. But your views are well noted. Let me ask the Bretton Woods institution, sir. Are you totally against subsidy. For example, I don't know of any economy that doesn't use subsidy in one way or the other. For example, will you be against subsidizing production? Subsidy, for example, now we have a shock now. Okay? Will you be against an economy trying to subsidize production? You have to pass the gains on to the household and their families. Because I know at times, from when I used to work with the World Bank, there's something called targeted subsidy. So I just want to get your views on that, on the issue of subsidy. The World Bank and the IMF.
Yeah, let me start. So I think we have to start avoiding understanding economics from a binary perspective, right? Am I for subsidy or not? Yes or no? I think that's not the way things really work in practice. The question you should be asking is, first, what is the issue you're trying to resolve through the subsidy? What is the market failure you're trying to resolve with this interventionist policy you want to put in place first? So is it well addressed through subsidy, or is it best addressed through other horizontal policies? This is one. The second is, what is your available fiscal space that you have in order to sustain the subsidy? If you don't have the fiscal space, maybe your subsidy has to be temporary, and very importantly, your subsidy has to be extremely well targeted because you just don't have the means to sustain it and have a broad and blanket subsidy in the system. So it becomes really a matrix, a decision tree, where you start with, can I afford this? If I can barely afford it, can I have it with clear sunset clauses? If I define the sunset clauses, which is very difficult politically, because once you put the subsidy, it's very hard to remove it. And third, what other options do I have to make sure that this market failure, this problem I want to solve, I can solve it with the least cost measure in place. So in general, we will use the degree of the shock you want to stabilize as the first metric. If the shock is really extreme and creates massive dislocation, yes, there could be ways for you to think about subsidies. If it's a shock that is not extremely strong and in time T you have all the information that this shock is temporary, you can use some other policies as well. So it's really a matter of, can I afford it? Can I target it well? And can I define very clear sunset clauses to exit this so that I can reactivate the normal price signals in the economy? Because at the end of the day, you want prices to tell you what is the imbalance between demand and supply at any time, at any point in time. You don't want prices to be capped and you don't really understand exactly what is the dynamic of the economy. So if we just change the framework from a binary perspective and start having all the possible constraints that the policymaker faces, then we will be able to think about a framework where at times temporary, well-targeted, and well-implemented subsidies can be a boon.
Thank you.
So let me stop here.
Just sorry, yeah. Okay, thank you. So I don't think there's any dogmatic, ideology whether you want to kind of have subsidy or not. I think kind of Christian said it all, is like you need to have a support that is targeted, timed, and well intended, and it has a clear kind of fiscal space for it. I think that's kind of the framework to think about it. Thank you.
Yes, I think I want to support the idea of a subsidy on production. If you noticed that inflation rate moderated to 15.06% in February, as of February, is also as a result of the fact that food inflation dropped. As a matter of fact, food inflation dropped in January to 8%. February, it imped up to 12%. And why did we have that fall in food inflation? Last year, everybody knows, we imported food. And that was why food fell. Yes, we agree that the monetary side did a lot in terms of the demand side, which of course the monetary side can only... You're welcome, ma. So because of the weight of food in the inflation, basket, I would say that we can use one stone to kill two birds. Use one stone to bring down inflation, and also use that same stone to, raise GDP. And that is where the subsidy, agri subsidy, comes in. So I will support a situation where we use the revenues we are getting now by way of the, oil boom to see how we can subsidize agriculture. You said it now, fertilizer, cost of fertilizer, farm inputs are going up. Why can't we use, dedicate part of the money we are getting now to subsidize, farmers? So I'm in support of subsidies on agriculture.
Yeah, so quickly, in terms of the subsidy world, Nigeria, I think it was in the right direction. However, it was clear that it would lead to inflationary pressures. So the problem is that there is no clear strategy to cushion the effect of the subsidy on the public and the vulnerable. So I think maybe there should have been a strategy to cushion the effect before the actual subsidy.
Yeah, thank you. I would say this, especially for economists, in humble way, I would say we usually respond to where the data is. So if you're talking about subsidy, and for instance, we want to subsidize agriculture, do we have the data of real farmers, smallholder farmers, smallholder women farmers? Do we have that data? My organization has been trying to collect that data for about 4 years. The problem with subsidy is not subsidy in itself. It is that it does not get to the right people. Now, if we want to subsidize the agri sector, which is very, very germane, is so important, how many farmers are still farming now? Insecurity has made everyone to run away. You were talking about inflation dropping because we have to import food. Why are we import food? Should that be the approach? It's because we can no longer farm. The insecurity data, and these things are lacking. We're talking about geopolitics, talking about what is happening in the world. We're not talking about what is happening here. NBS also we have not gotten the data for unemployment. We have not gotten data for insecurity. It was released in 2024. It was pulled down. The NBS shut down it was hacked for a whole month. And when the website came back, that report was brought down. So if we don't have critical intelligence on insecurity that affects agriculture, and you are trying to put subsidy, important subsidy there, it will end up in the hands of political farmers. So data is essential. Especially, we are talking about welfare, data on household, not just only the data we are used to, the macroeconomic data and the firm data. What about household data? We need this data, and this kind of data is what we need for any kind of subsidy to be able to work and affect the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, two questions only from the audience. Two questions only. I only need a female. I'm biased. Okay. Madam. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, you. Yes.
just a quick question. Nigeria's been talking for the past couple of years about being a $1 trillion economy by 2030. From where Nigeria stands now, considering everything that's been happening, do you think this is realizable as just a pipe dream? And if it is, what are the imperatives? What does the Nigerian government have to do to be able to achieve this? Yes, thank you. Anyone that is ready to answer it.
Thank you very much. We all know that because of the Middle East crisis, there is a hike in the oil price. So there's likely that we are going to have oil windfall. So I want to ask, what is the best practice in managing this windfall? How do we insulate the revenue gains from this windfall from the election that is coming in 2000? Should we hand it over to sovereign wealth fund to manage for us, or we create a special fund, or we sterilize it with the central bank, and then thereafter we can make it? What is the best practice for managing such fund? Thank you.
Good. So who out of the panelists do you want to answer?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So I will just try to quickly provide some insights on the second question about the oil windfall. I think the other panelists can also provide some insights. You know, there is no perfect way to manage a windfall. There is no recipe across countries. I think the first thing is just about a few principles. One is it has to be managed transparently, okay? So the windfall has to be identified, and it has to be managed within a budget framework. It has to have a very clear inflow and outflow rules, so how much comes in and how much leaves the buffer to fund critical infrastructure and so on. But this is something that is done within a country with all the stakeholders. The National Assembly has a role to play, different stakeholders. In the case of Nigeria with fiscal federalism, there's also a conversation between the states and the subnationals. Second, you have to know where you are in the cyclical position, right? If your economy is already booming and you have an additional windfall, is it wise, as Summer said, to engage in pro-cyclical fiscal policy when you're already overheating? I don't think so. So if you are in a recession and you have a windfall that suddenly comes, maybe it's good time to use the windfall for counter-cyclical fiscal policies. Third, the windfall has to be managed pragmatically. So you have to look at what are the market failures you want to address, what are the key growth bottlenecks you want to fix, and how your economy is likely to respond to a fiscal impulse that is funded by the windfall. If you go too fast, you may actually increase inflationary pressure again. You have to look at what monetary policy is doing as well, you know, because both policy, fiscal and monetary policy, have to be complementary. So managing a windfall requires a social contract, including different stakeholders in the economy. Second, where you are in the cyclical position in your economy, are you overheating or not? Where is your inflation level? And third, if you have clearly identified in a national development plan, for example, you know, what are the key growth bottlenecks? In the case of Nigeria, you have electricity deficit, which is really, really a serious problem for your growth. You have insecurity, you have agricultural sector, and so on. So without a plan, managing a windfall becomes a bet. You don't want to start betting scarce resources without a clear plan.
Thank you. I don't think we have too much time. Let's just end this session. Time anymore. So I want to thank the panelists for this wonderful job. The discussion continues. Thank you.